Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. This week, ambushes, hissy fits and drama at La Vuelta a España. I'll be looking back at the action from the third and final week of the third and final Grand Tour of the season. We've also got the Benelux Tour, the Ceratizit Challenge by La Vuelta, the opening stage of the Tour of Britain, and an update on my Zwift Academy participation. But I shall start with La Vuelta, which provided us with some of the most incredibly exciting and dramatic racing over the final week. The one constant over that week, though, was Primoz Roglic, who showed no signs of weakness whatsoever. Fabio Jakobsen got back to his winning ways on the first of the week stages, his third of the race at that point. It gave him a virtually unassailable lead in the points classification. All he needed to do was to get himself over the mountains, which he duly did. Things kicked off big time though on the following stage to Lagos de Covadonga, one of the best races that I have seen in quite some time. Ineos Grenadiers hit the front early with Egan Bernal launching a scintillating attack which only Primoz Roglic was able to follow. And we were left wondering whether Roglic would work with him or not. He did, and far from paying for that effort, he dropped Bernal on the final climb and had ridden himself back into the overall race lead in the process. These images of Roglic descending back down whilst teammate Sepp Kuss raced to second place highlighted the domination. How demoralising must it be for your rivals trying to take time back on you, only to see him wrapped in a team jacket and heading down towards the team bus before you've even finished the stage. The blitz by Bernal on that penultimate climb of the day though was incredible, and even more so when you look at the power produced by those that he'd left behind. Both Sepp Kuss and Jack Haig uploaded their power files to Strava after the stage, with Kuss having averaged 6.3 watts per kilo for over 23 minutes. And given that they took over 40 seconds longer to cover that climb, you can only wince at the thought of what Bernal and Roglic were doing out front. And fair play to Bernal for trying everything he could to animate the race and turn it on its head. Not even finishing the stage though was Mikel Landa, despite having put in a searing attack on the second climb of the day. He had a very disappointing race all told, and as much as I love Mikel Landa, to see him do that attack and then abandon didn't sit very well with me. I mean, he appeared to have given Jack Haig very little help in his bid to get a good result on GC. It didn't affect Haig though, thankfully, or the team, who rode tremendously over the remaining stages to get Haig on the third step of the podium. Most of that work was done on the penultimate stage of the race, and it was once again the Ineos Grenadiers who lit the blue touch paper. Puccio, Pidcock and then Sivakov rode so hard that with still over 60 kilometres to race, it was basically just the top 10 on GC who were left in the race. And with constant attacks, the group eventually split in two, and this was the precise moment where Miguel Angel Lopez effectively watched the race slip away from him. What came afterwards, we didn't see, at least not on the feed that we had, but rumours started to circulate that Lopez had climbed off his bike, having thrown his toys out of the pram. He was then persuaded apparently to get back on, but would later climb off for good, foregoing what would have still been a top 6 placing on the general classification, with the points that brings for his team and the prize money that brings to the teammates that had worked so hard for him. It seemed like an act of petulance, and he did apologise the following day to his team, sponsors and fans. But it'll be interesting to see if there are any repercussions for him within the Movistar team. Ahead of him, Bahrain had pulled off a coup. Maida had done the majority of the work, and then Marc Pardon eventually agreed to go back from the break and give a helping hand. Haig was left to finish the job off following the multiple attacks of Adam Yates on the final climb, and you can see from his Strava file, neatly broken down here by Matti Puraili on Twitter, that it was an enormous effort. 15 minutes at 420 watts to make that initial split, 7 minutes over 430 watts on a segment of that final climb. The stage win was still up for grabs though, and that was a story in itself. The early break, which had enjoyed an advantage of 12 minutes, looked set to fight it out for the win. However, with everything kicking off behind, the last man standing, Ryan Gibbons, was caught on the final climb. With Roglic, Yates, Mas and Haig all marking each other out though, it did allow some of that early break to get back on, including the Frenchman Clément Champoussin. He attacked in the closing stages and gained enough of an advantage to take the win on the day. And what a way to take your first ever pro win. Roglic took no prisoners behind, taking second place and putting the title beyond any doubt, with Yates third, Mas fourth and a happy Haig in fifth, moving up to third on GC. Equally happy in ninth was his teammate Gino Maida. He'd moved himself up to fifth on the general classification and more importantly, ahead of Bernal, and that meant he took the white jersey home. Meanwhile, Nick Schultz made us all feel a little bit better about ourselves with the way he rode, or didn't ride in fact, the last metres to the finish line of stage 20. It did make me chuckle when I got a message asking if Matt Stevens was back in the race. It looked like some troubles clipping in there, didn't it? And so all that was left was the final time trial, and there really only was going to be one winner in that stage, wasn't there? Primož Roglič wanted a 4th stage win, but so too did Magnus Cort Nielsen. He set the best time at all the intermediate checks and the finish line, sitting in the hot seat with a nervous wait to see how Roglič fared. Unfortunately for Cort Nielsen, Roglič fared as he normally does in time trials, very well. He caught and passed Enric Mas before the line, who'd started 2 minutes before him. Although it was quite close with Magnus Cort Nielsen. Roglič just 14 seconds faster than the Dane, who is clearly on the form of his life. So, Primož Roglič takes his 3rd successive Vuelta a España title with 4 stage wins along the way. There was not one moment of weakness, no hesitancy, no point at which he or his team looked like they lacked control, except for that one small incident on a descent in the 2nd week. So he's now finished on the podium of every Grand Tour he's ridden since the 2018 Tour de France, and the only other stage race he's finished in which he hasn't ended on the podium was this year's Paris-Nice, where he crashed on the final stage. The man is a machine, basically. And the gaps in the top 10 highlighted how tough the race overall has been. Felix Großschartner over 22 minutes down. And I couldn't remember the last time we'd seen such a large gap in the top 10 on GC at La Vuelta, but I actually didn't have to go too far back to find it. There was also over 22 minutes back to 10th place Mikel Nieve when Roglič won his first Vuelta in 2019. I think we can all agree, though, that it was a thoroughly entertaining 3 weeks despite the supremacy of Roglič. Thanks very much to all of you who tuned into our GCN Plus coverage to watch it. Now, just before we finish with La Vuelta, I know some of you have been riding over some of the same climbs on Ruvi. Manon was back on it this week on what turned out to be a bit of an epic. Let's see how she got on.
I'm back tackling another Vuelta Ruvi ride. Now, last time I had the privilege of doing a nice flat ride. Today, it is a completely different story. Today I'm tackling a section of stage 18, and in 29 kilometers, there is 1,953 meters of climbing. Now, I don't actually think I've ever done that much climbing in my life, but I'm gonna get myself warmed up and I'm gonna tackle that 29 kilometers and set my best time. But I'm challenging you guys to get on Ruvi 2 and tackle stage 18 and let me know what time you did.
Two hours and 20 minutes it took Manon to complete all of that climbing. And if you'd like to see how you'd go on that same course, we put a link in the description below with all the details. Meanwhile, at the Ceratizit Challenge by La Vuelta, that culminated yesterday with the flattest of the 4 stages. It all kicked off on Thursday with a break of 4 finishing well ahead of the main field, and best of that 4 was an in-form Marlen Reusser. She soloed to win 22 seconds in front of Corinne Rivera and a minute 48 ahead of the peloton, which contained pre-race favourite Annemiek van Vleuten. And what made the win all the more impressive was that she didn't even think there was a race on that day.
I thought I'm so tired of Holland, of CIMAC Ladies Tour. I was 2 days in school yesterday, the whole day travel, and I thought we have a rest day today, it starts tomorrow. I had it wrong in my head, so I was like, yeah, I can do whatever, so I just thought I'd go for an attack, for a breakaway, and then yeah, I just pedaled a lot and we kept away, and I felt the others don't have that much, so I just tried to go and it worked out, and I didn't want to sprint against Corinne Rivera, so I tried my luck and it worked out. It's incredible.
That interview did make me chuckle. She was expecting a rest, but instead rode away from everyone to take a stage win. And at that point, given her time trialling pedigree and clear current form, it looked as though she'd set herself up nicely for an overall win too. However, Annemiek van Vleuten had other ideas. She blitzed up the mountain time trial the following day, but with Reusser just 20 seconds behind, she still had a lot of ground to make up, which she did on stage 3. She attacked on the biggest climb of the day, with well over 50 k's to go, carving out an advantage of almost 3 minutes. And despite the best efforts of a strong chasing group behind her, which contained Reusser, van Vleuten would eventually finish with a margin of 2 minutes and 48 seconds over Liane Lippert of DSM, more than enough to put the Dutch woman into the overall race lead. I mean, We have come to expect these sorts of exploits from Van Vleuten. We take them for granted, but we shouldn't. It's phenomenal that she is able to ride away from the best cyclists in the world on such a regular basis. She's just an incredible athlete who's at the very top of her game at the age of 38. On the fourth and final stage, it looked like there would be yet more success for Team Movistar. American Leah Thomas was the last survivor of the breakaway, and with the camera shots we were watching, looked like she was about to take the win. Until...
Has a glance back over the shoulder just to see where the chasers are behind. Is she going to do it again and steal this one for Team Movistar? Leah Thomas onto the paving slabs now. Just through this last minute, levels up, and Lotte Kopecky and Lisa Longo Borghini come past like they've been launched out of a cannon. Longo Borghini now on the front, Kopecky locked and ready on the wheel. Can she come over the top? The Italian champion, the Belgian champion now setting up, affords herself a glance back over the shoulder. Lotte Kopecky now launches the move. Longo Borghini fights back. Lotte Kopecky takes the stage.
Heartbreak for Thomas. Those two came flying past her, didn't they? Elisa Longo Borghini did everything she could to take the win, but she wasn't a match for Lotte Kopecky, who had an extra acceleration before the line. That marked Kopecky's 7th win of the season so far, and I've got her down as my favourite to win the inaugural Paris-Roubaix in 4 weeks' time. Van Vleuten crossed the line safely in the bunch to take the GC, which is her 12th win of 2021 in just 33 days of racing. She, as you would expect, is leading the Women's World Tour standings, and by quite some margin now. Up in the Benelux Tour, all eyes were on Remco Evenepoel after his recent run of form, but eyes were on him for the wrong reasons at the start of the race. He made the front split on the opening stage, but collided with another rider in an instant we didn't see. He wasn't hurt, but he did need a replacement wheel, and it took forever, partly because the neutral service mechanic had a rear wheel and not a front, and an angry Evenepoel would concede 57 seconds on a stage won by Tim Merlier of Alpecin Fenix with an average speed of 48 km/h. Evenepoel's race went from bad to worse overnight as he got sick and was unable to eat until just before the Stage 2 time trial. He finished 18th there and would soldier on for 2 more stages before pulling the pin. He'll be back in action at the European Championships this week. Stefan Bissegger laid down another superb time trial that day to convincingly win that second stage. Nobody could get within 15 seconds of the Swissman, who blitzed around the 11k course at an average speed of just under 55 km/h. And that's his second win in a World Tour individual time trial this year, and he's been incredibly consistent in the others too. Watch out Filippo Ganna. The breakaway had its day on Stage 3, and it was Taco van der Hoorn who struck again. And I think we should all take a moment to appreciate his headbanging style as he outsprints Matthias Norsgaard to the line here. Brilliant. Van der Hoorn's brilliant season has been rewarded with a 3-year contract extension, incidentally, at Intermarché Wanty-Gobert, who I must say have achieved a hell of a lot more than I was expecting of them at the start of this year. Chapeau to them. Tim Merlier was back to winning ways on Stage 4, somehow finding the gaps to get through and unleash a devastating acceleration with only around 50 metres to go, beating Mads Pedersen to the line in what was a chaotic and very disorganised bunch sprint. Merlier now has 18 total career victories, and 9 of them have come this season. Caleb Ewan had got boxed out that day, but he got himself off the mark on the 5th stage, getting himself over the climbs and then out-sprinting Sonny Colbrelli in the uphill drag to the line. And it was on that stage that we also had a change of race leadership. Stefan Bissegger was dropped, Kasper Asgreen suffered a mechanical, Durbridge was behind a split, and so it was Stefan Kung who went into the leader's jersey. The hilly parkour of Stage 6 proved a little too much for Kung though, and it was Bahrain Victorious who took full advantage. Now you'd have thought the stage might have proven too tough for Sonny Colbrelli too, but not with the form he's been showing this season. After some help from teammate Matej Mohoric, he found himself off the front alone with just over 25 k's remaining, and despite the best efforts of those behind, with Tom Dumoulin looking particularly good, he was never caught. Colbrelli took all the bonus seconds in the Golden Kilometre and at the finish line, and with a 42-second winning margin, he took a healthy overall lead to boot. Behind him, Mohoric sprinted to 2nd place, giving them a 1-2 on the GC going into the 7th and final stage, where they went 1-2 again, but in a different order. On the final full ascent of the Muur van Gerardsbergen, Mohoric powered away from everyone else, and with Colbrelli following everyone that moved behind, nobody managed to chase him back. Mohoric took the stage in 2nd place overall, Colbrelli with the 2nd on the stage and 1st overall. Dumoulin took 3rd on the stage, whilst 3rd on GC went to Victor Campenaerts. Now, there are a lot of Belgian riders I've noticed on very good form ahead of the World Championships, Victor Campenaerts amongst them, and the World Championships taking place in Belgium, of course. I would not want the job of team selector, I've got to say. That's going to be an interesting one. The Tour of Britain also kicked off yesterday with the first stage taking place down in Cornwall. The early break was never given much of an advantage, and with 20 k's to go, they'd all been reeled in by the bunch. A crash disrupted things slightly in the closing stages, but most of the big hitters got through it unscathed, and the biggest hitter of them all was Wout van Aert. Julian Alaphilippe had gone early after a strong lead out from his team, but the world champion just doesn't quite seem to have his normal sparkle at the moment, does he? And in the end, Van Aert made it look easy. A strong ride from Niels Eekhoff saw him take second, with Serrano in third for Movistar and Ethan Hayter in fourth on the day. That race continues today as it heads to Exeter in Devon on another undulating and deceptively tough stage. Time now for me to let you know what's coming up on GCN Plus over the next week. As mentioned, the Tour of Britain continues today with stage 2 of the race, and that will carry on through to Sunday with the finish in Aberdeen. Now, the weather here is unusually good for the time of year, or any time of year potentially in the UK, so it might not be quite as grimy as it sometimes can be, but I'm sure that won't make it any less exciting. It could be the best preparation, in fact, for the upcoming World Championships we will see in a few weeks. Now, along with the Tour of Britain, we've also got the European Championships this week, which, like the Tour of Britain, is available in all GCN Plus territories. The racing takes place in Italy and kicks off with the mixed relay time trial on Wednesday, culminating with the men's road race on Sunday. We've also got 2 other one-day races for you on Sunday, with the Antwerp Ports Classic in Belgium and the GP Formula in France. And beyond that, would you believe it? Cyclocross is starting. It catches me out every single year when it still feels like we're in full road season mode, but we have a huge winter of cyclocross coming up for you this season, and it all starts this Sunday with the first round of the Ethias Cross Series. And in 3 weeks' time, we are very pleased to be bringing you a set of brand new events. The US Cyclocross Series takes place over 8 rounds on 4 consecutive weekends, starting on the 25th of September in Rochester. And we're very excited about this one because we know how much you love your cyclocross over in the US, but also over the rest of the world. For those of us in Europe, for example, we'll be able to kick back and watch the events live in the evenings, prime time. I'll bring you more details of that series in the coming weeks. Just before we move on to some other racing news, I wanted to give you all an update on my participation in the 2021 Zwift Academy. Now, it's been over a year since I last got myself on an indoor trainer, and I decided now was the time to dust it off and get myself back into shape. For those of you unaware of what the Zwift Academy is, it's a talent identification programme that has been running since 2016. That year it was for women only, but they added a men's division in 2017, and I was fortunate enough to travel to South Africa to see the final 3 riders put through their paces. Since then, the Zwift Academy has got bigger and better every single year. Tanya Erat and Ella Harris have both had successful years with Canyon SRAM, and the most recent winner, Jay Vine, has had a brilliant year with Alpecin Fenix. So much so, in fact, they've already re-signed him for a further 2 years. So it is a huge opportunity for talented youngsters to get a chance on the biggest stage of international road racing, and this year, you'd imagine, will be more competitive than ever. Now, you might be wondering what on earth I'm doing getting involved. Some say I'm not young, most say I'm not talented, but the Zwift Academy has developed into something far more than talent ID. They're expecting 400,000 entries this time around, and only a small proportion of that number will be thinking they've got a chance of going pro. The rest of us are in it to follow a programme that should see us getting fitter and therefore faster. If you choose to do it, you will start with a baseline ride. That involves 3 big efforts that will show you where you are right now in terms of fitness. The idea being that once you've followed the programme, those numbers have got better when you repeat that same ride at the end. So although I'm not expecting to be lining up for Paris-Roubaix in a team with Mathieu van der Poel next year, I am hoping to have made some improvements. I will see. And so will you, if you so wish, because we'll be documenting the journey on GCN, so stay tuned this week for my baseline ride to see just how low that baseline currently is. In other news, World of Cycling diarist Mitch Docker unfortunately crashed at the start of stage 4 of the Benelux Tour, and although he managed to finish, a subsequent X-ray revealed that he'd fractured his elbow. And the Australian is set to retire after Paris-Roubaix this year, in which he still hopes to compete. Matt Hayman 2.0 is how he's currently describing it. We shall see. Another man who'll be retiring at the end of this year, surprisingly so, is Dan Martin. The Irishman announced the news last week, and I say it was surprising because he's obviously still got it. He won a very hard stage of the Giro d'Italia back in May, but so he's lost a bit of the love he had for the sport, and he wants to move on to the next part of his life. It's been a really solid career for Dan Martin, and if he doesn't take another victory between now and the end of this season, it will mean that his final 3 wins as a pro were a stage of each Grand Tour, which really is quite something. One rider who most certainly will be continuing for years to come is Mathieu van der Poel. He and his team Alpecin-Fenix revealed that he's extended his contract through to the end of 2025. Meanwhile, in transfer news, Rowan Dennis has been confirmed as signing for Jumbo-Visma for the next 2 years. The Australian finished recently 3rd behind Roglic and Dumoulin at the Olympic individual time trial, both of whom will shortly become his teammates. I think rivals will be hoping there's no team time trial at the Tour de France next year. And finally, Ineos Grenadiers have signed another promising young British rider in the form of Ben Tulett. The 20-year-old has spent the last 2 seasons with Alpecin-Fenix and had some seriously impressive performances this year, including top 20s at La Flèche Wallonne and Amstel Gold, and a top 10 on GC at the recent Tour of Poland. His contract with Ineos is for the next 3 seasons, and he'll link back up with Tom Pidcock, with whom he spent a lot of time in the cyclocross scene. They could be a formidable duo in the Classics, I think, in the coming years. Right, that is all for this week, but I'll be back with you next week to once again round up all the action. See you then.